Welcome to the July tutorial. We are going to be painting a delphinium, and delphiniums are one of the birth flowers for July. And you can see here that I am just going over my drawing and transferring it onto my watercolor paper. And we are using 140-pound fluid cold pressed paper for this class rather than Arches. And I'm just going over all of the lines and making sure that it transfers nicely onto my paper, just checking as I go. And I have a little washi tape attached to the tracing paper onto the watercolor paper. Because it is low tack, it won't leave any stickiness on my watercolor paper. If you would like to follow along with the same drawing, you can see that beside my drawing there, I have the printable line drawing that you can download and use for your own painting, or you can, of course, draw your own delphinium and paint along with me as well, whichever you prefer. So I'm just going to mix up some colors, and the delphinium is sort of a bluey purple, and so I have chosen to use some cerulean blue with quinacridone rose for most of the flower coloring, and I'm just mixing up a few different concentrations of the colors. So the first puddle is sort of an even mix of quinacridone rose and cerulean blue. And then I have cerulean blue on its own. And then I have the quinacridone rose with just a little bit of cerulean blue added, so that we have some purpley colors, more of just the lighter blue. And then another puddle with more cerulean blue and just a touch of the pink added, so sort of a bluey purple. So we're just using two colors, but what we're doing is varying the amounts. So more blue on with some of the puddles, more pink with some of the other mixes. And so this gives you a really harmonious look for your painting, but it just gives different concentrations and sort of depth to your painting. And some of these puddles are warmer, the ones that have more pink in them, and then some of the colors are cooler, the ones that have more blue in them. For the flower centers, I am mixing up some neutral tint with light red and a bit of cerulean, and then the other puddle is just neutral tint, and I'm going to add a little quinacridone rose to it. We're ready to start our delphinium painting, and I'm going to reference my line drawing, which I have just to the side, so I can have a look and see how the flowers go on the first layer. I've got all my colors ready and mixed up, and clean water here, and then I have my color mixing brush. I have a number 4, a number 2, and a 00 round brush, which I'll be using mostly for this project. And we are using 140-pound cold pressed paper by Fluid brand today, not Arches, because we will be using a bit of a looser approach, and step 1 we will be sort of dragging our wet paint across the paper to create that first wash, which saves quite a bit of time, and it gives you a bit of a looser effect. And so we'll still be following the 3-step method with those few adjustments. I'm removing the excess graphite off my paper with my kneaded eraser. I've just sort of rolled it into a little sort of tube, and then I'm just dabbing away, getting that excess graphite off. I'm going to start at the top of the stalk for the flowers, and just taking some of that cerulean blue and making sure that all of my paint is really milky and nice and wet, so sort of like a milky to watery consistency. And I'm using my number 2 brush right now, and I will use the number 2 brush for most of the project. I'm switching brushes as little as possible. I'm not really needing to use the hairdryer at all. I'm just using my new approach to save time and just feel really free and loose while I paint and just really enjoy the process. So I've added in one petal, and then I decided to do one of the flower centers. I wasn't sure if I was going to do the flower centers after I'd done the petals or before, so I just sort of experimenting here and just dabbing in the color, making just an irregular sort of abstract shape, not worrying about showing too much detail. And then I'm rinsing my brush, picking up more cerulean blue, and you can see I'm just sort of pressing and dragging my brush. That way I get some variation in color. I'm not even really worried if the center's dry. If it bleeds in, that's fine. It actually was pretty dry, so there wasn't very much color bleeding. And then I picked up one of the other purple colors and just dragged a little in while it was still wet. You do not have to do that if you don't want. For most of the petals, I actually just did the one color. I didn't really add the extra color in. So if you are just starting out, I'd suggest just doing the one color, then you don't have to worry about blending. So I just added color there, then I dipped my brush in the water really quickly, dabbed it, and then finished dragging the color out. And that is something you will want to take note of and practice, because it gives you a more concentrated color on the first bit of the petal, and then it just slightly fades it out. And it's very subtle, but this is one of the things that really makes this method of painting work. So you can see I'm dragging and sort of wiggling my brush and then sort of spreading out the bristles and dragging it around. And you can use the Arches paper for this project with this technique. However, the fluid paper is a little less absorbent. It's also less expensive, so you don't have to worry about messing your project up, but it just sort of, for me, my brush and color glides along the paper a little bit easier. So you can see there how I have one side is a little bit darker where I've laid the color in first, and then it sort of fades out as the color runs out on my brush. So you don't have to make this complicated. Just drag a color across, fill up the shape, and then you can just take a little bit more color out with a bit of a damp brush like I did there, or rinse a bit of the color out, whichever you would like to do. And the other thing you'll notice is that I'm using different puddles for each of the petals. So typically the vertical petals are cooler on flowers and the horizontal petals are warmer. And so this variation in tone and then the mix of warm and cool colors are really important for making this approach of painting work for creating the depth and interest. So you can take a look at the mindset tip in the article for this video, and it just gives you some ideas of how to keep track of that if you're just starting out. Because mixing up those warm and cool colors is a really, really effective way to paint. So I'm just going to carry on doing this same thing. So again, horizontal is the warmer pinky purple colors. Vertical are the more blue colors, which are the cooler colors. And just have fun with this and relax, and don't worry about blending colors or, you know, doing anything fancy. I am giving you those tips to dilute color. But again, if you're just starting out, just have fun applying the color in a nice wash. And if you find that you are not able to get the color to glide over one petal at a time, then you'll probably need to have your paint more watery. And if it's too faint, then you'll just need to make sure you use an old brush and mix up more color in your paint puddles so they're more concentrated. So I decided to do all the petals before I do the flower centers, and that's what I'll do. And then we'll start on to the next step after that's done. So the first layer of my petals for step 1 is complete. You can see them all nice and dry now. They just dried as I painted. So I'm going to do the flower centers now. And I'm still using my number 2 brush, and I'm just sort of stippling in some irregular shapes, leaving some white space. And then I decided it looked just a little too hard, so I rinsed my brush and dabbed it, and then just took my damp brush and sort of faded out a little bit of the color. So what you want to achieve here is just an irregular shape that has some white paper showing still, and then some darker and lighter areas, so you can just add the color on, and you can let the paint run out so it's a bit lighter, and then pick up some more concentrated paint and add that in, as I am doing here, to get, again, color variation, and sort of some different texture of some of the harder markings, and then some of the softer areas where I've faded it out with my clean damp brush. And just, again, have fun with this. It doesn't need to be very detailed at all. And we will just fill in each of the flower centers and let it dry before we move on to step 2.